Welcome to another Deep Dive, listeners. This time we're going to flip the script a bit. We're going to dive into something that might seem a little counterintuitive at first, the potential upside of bias.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that makes you think. Usually, bias is something we try to avoid, right? We want to be objective, fair, see things clearly.
Exactly. Like you and I always try to do.
Absolutely. But these sources you send over got me thinking, what if sometimes, just sometimes, bias can actually work in our favor?
I know, right? It's kind of like turning conventional wisdom on its head.
Totally. And to make things even more interesting, our main source material for this deep dive is, well, a conversation with an AI chatbot.
So we're looking at human bias through the lens of artificial intelligence. That's pretty meta, don't you think?
It is, and it actually leads to some really insightful observations, like how our negativity bias, that tendency to focus on the bad stuff, might be a survival mechanism passed down from our ancestors.
Okay, I can see where this is going. Like that feeling you get when you're walking alone at night, and every shadow seems like a potential threat.
Exactly. From an evolutionary standpoint, that heightened awareness, even if it seems irrational, could have helped our ancestors avoid danger and, well, survive.
So instead of calling it paranoia, maybe we should call it evolutionary caution.
I like that. And it all comes down to context. The same instinct, this bias towards negativity, can be helpful in other situations too. The AI gives the example of a firefighter.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Imagine rushing into a burning building. There's no time to overthink things, right?
They have to make split-second decisions.
Exactly. They rely on their training, their experience, their gut feelings, which you could argue are all forms of bias to act quickly and potentially save lives.
So in a way, they're using years of accumulated knowledge as a sort of bias to guide them in those high-pressure moments.
Precisely. It's like a shortcut that allows them to access the most relevant information instantly.
Okay, that makes sense. So are we saying that bias can sometimes actually be a tool for efficiency?
In certain situations, I think so. And the AI goes on to talk about another type of bias, confirmation bias.
Oh, this is a good one. The one where we tend to seek out information that supports our existing beliefs.
Exactly. And we've all been guilty of it, right? I know I have.
Oh yeah, me too. Especially when it comes to something I'm really passionate about. It's like I almost subconsciously gravitate towards sources that validate my viewpoint.
And here's where it gets interesting. The AI actually argues that confirmation bias can play a role in reinforcing learning.
Really. I always thought of it as more of a hindrance to learning, like making us closed off to new ideas.
It can definitely do that. But think about it. When we encounter information that confirms what we already believe, it strengthens those neural pathways in our brains, making the knowledge stick better.
Hmm. Yeah, I could see that. Like each piece of supporting evidence is adding another layer of truth to that belief in my mind.
Exactly. But of course, we have to be careful because, as you said, that same mechanism can make us resistant to new information that challenges our existing views.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it really is. Finding that balance is key. And speaking of balance, this next point from the AI is probably the most surprising one of all. It suggests that biases can actually contribute to social harmony.
Wait, what? Isn't bias usually seen as something that divides people?
It can, for sure. But think about it, within a culture, people often share similar biases, even if they're not aware of it.
Okay, I'm listening.
So it's like everyone's operating from a similar set of assumptions, even if those assumptions aren't entirely objective. And this shared foundation can actually make social interactions smoother, more predictable.
Hmm. So even though biases are technically distortions of reality, if everyone in a group shares those distortions, it creates a kind of common ground.
Precisely. It's like a shared language that helps people understand each other's behavior, their humor, their values.
It's like a shortcut to connection, even if it's based on a slightly skewed perspective.
Exactly. And the AI even goes a step further, saying that some biases actually encourage positive social behaviors, like fairness and altruism.
So things like empathy and compassion, those could be influenced by bias.
The AI seems to think so. It argues that these biases, even if they're not conscious, can promote cooperation and kindness, which are essential for a functioning society.
Wow, this is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about bias. It's like this hidden force that shapes our behavior in all these unexpected ways, both good and bad.
And that brings us to your specific situation, the one you mentioned in the source material. You talked about feeling frustrated with those motivational talks that companies often give.
Oh yeah, those, don't get me wrong, I appreciate a good pep talk now and then, but sometimes they feel so forced and Honestly, a little manipulative.
It's a common sentiment, especially for people who are more analytical and tend to see through the hype.
Yeah, it's like they're treating everyone like part of a mindless math that needs to be motivated.
And the AI actually offers some interesting advice for dealing with this kind of situation. It suggests that instead of making a big public statement against the talk, which could backfire, you should focus on having one-on-one conversations to express your concerns.
That's a good point. It's a more nuanced approach that allows for genuine dialogue and understanding.
Exactly. The AI also emphasizes the importance of self-care in these kinds of situations.
So, like, don't let that frustration fester and turn into resentment.
Right. When you encounter something that bothers you, it's essential to find healthy ways to process those emotions and maintain your own well-being.
Taking a walk, listening to music, talking to a friend, those are all good strategies.
Absolutely. And here's where it ties back to the bigger picture of bias. The AI asks, could your dislike of these motivational talks be influenced by your own biases?
Whoa, that's a good question. Never thought about it that way.
It's something to consider, right? Maybe your past experiences, your personality type, your values, they're all shaping how you perceive and react to these events.
It's like my own personal filters are influencing how I interpret the message.
Exactly. And that highlights the importance of self-awareness. We need to be aware of our own biases, both the helpful and the harmful ones, to navigate the world effectively.
So it's not about trying to eliminate bias altogether, which is probably impossible,
Yeah.
but about understanding how it shapes our perceptions and our decisions.
Precisely. And speaking of navigating the world, the AI ends with an analogy that really resonated with me. It compares the situation to social media.
Okay, I'm intrigued too.
The AI suggests that sometimes it's better to simply ignore things we dislike rather than engaging negatively.
Oh yeah, I can definitely relate to that, like scrolling past a post that annoys me instead of getting into a heated debate in the comments.
Exactly. Sometimes disengaging is the most empowering choice.
Because it's not worth getting riled up over something you can't control.
Right. It's about choosing your battles wisely and focusing on what you can control, your own thoughts, actions, and reactions.
So it's about finding a balance between speaking up when it matters and knowing when to let things go.
Precisely. And it all comes back to understanding our own biases and how they influence our interactions with the world around us.
This is blowing my mind. I never thought I'd see bias in such a positive light.
Me neither. And the fact that these insights are coming from an AI makes it even more fascinating. It's like artificial intelligence is helping us to understand ourselves better than ever before.
It's like AI is holding up a mirror to our own humanity, warts and all.
And maybe, just maybe, that's the key to creating a better future. A future where we can use our understanding of bias to create a more compassionate and just world for everyone.
It really is mind-blowing, isn't it? Like, where do you even draw the line? Is it even possible to be completely objective?
It makes you wonder, right? Are we all just walking around with these built-in biases shaping how we see everything?
It's like we're all looking through slightly different lenses. Exactly. And that's what I find so fascinating about this AI conversation. It's like it's giving us this outsider's perspective on how these human tendencies work.
It's like AI is holding up a mirror to us.
Yeah, and maybe that's not a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
What if AI, instead of being this thing we should be afraid of, could actually help us understand ourselves better?
Oh, I like that. So, like, instead of seeing AI as a threat, we could see it as this tool for self-discovery.
Exactly. Like if we can become more aware of our own biases, maybe we can start to like lessen their negative effects.
And even harness their positive potential, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So going back to the listener situation for a sec, remember they were talking about feeling frustrated with those company-wide motivational talks.
Oh, yeah. Those can be tricky.
And the AI's advice was to focus on one-on-one conversations instead of like making a big scene.
That's good advice. It's about picking your battles, right?
Yeah, and finding a way to communicate your perspective without, creating unnecessary drama.
Exactly. It's about being strategic.
Yeah.
And remember, the AI also emphasized self-care.
Oh, right. Like, don't let things get to you too much.
Yeah. Sometimes you just gotta step back, take a breath, do something to de-stress.
It's like they say, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. And then when you're feeling more centered, you can approach the situation with like a fresh perspective.
And that brings us back to that social media analogy the AI made.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
Sometimes it's better to just scroll on by than to get sucked into, like, a negativity spiral.
It's about protecting your energy.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it applies to so many things in life, not just social media.
Right. Sometimes the best response is no response.
For, like, a delayed response
Yeah.
after you've had a chance to process things,
It's all about making conscious choices.
right? And that's where understanding your own biases comes in.
Exactly. Once you know what your tendencies are, you can start to make more informed decisions about how you respond to things.
It's like turning bias from this, like, hidden force that controls you into a tool you can actually use.
That's a great way to put it. It's about taking back your power.
And realizing that even though bias is part of who we are, it doesn't have to define us.
It's about acknowledging it, understanding it, and then deciding how we want to let it shape our actions.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about being aware.
And, maybe even using that awareness to make the world a little bit better.
I love that. Like turning our understanding of bias into a force for good.
Exactly. If we can all get a little bit better at recognizing our own biases, imagine the positive ripple effects that could have.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
Me too. It's like we've all got these superpowers, but we're just starting to figure out how to use them.
This conversation has been so inspiring.
I agree. Before we wrap up, though, I want to leave our listeners with one last thought to chew on.
Hit me with it.
If bias is this, like, fundamental part of being human, then what does that say about the whole idea of absolute truth?
Whoa, that is a deep question.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, is it even possible to be completely objective? Or is there always going to be some element of subjectivity?
It's like that saying, there are three sides to every story. Your side, my side, and the truth.
Exactly. And maybe by acknowledging that, by accepting that we all have our own biases, we can actually start to bridge the gap between our different perspectives.
It's about finding common ground, even when we disagree.
Yeah, and realizing that, maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle.
This is making me want to, like, go out and have deep conversations with everyone I know.
Me too. And maybe that's the first step, right? Just being open to hearing different viewpoints, even if they challenge our own.
It's about having those tough conversations with grace and understanding.
Exactly. And remembering that we all have something to learn from each other.
Well said. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have. But before we wrap things up, I want to give a big shout out to all of our amazing listeners.
Yes, thank you so much for tuning in and joining us on this wild ride.
We hope this episode has given you some new insights into the power of bias, both the good and the, well, not so good.
And we hope you'll stick with us as we continue to dive deep into the mysteries of the human experience. It's like we always say on the show, right? It's all about the journey. And sometimes the most important discoveries we make are the ones about ourselves.
So true. And I think this deep dive has really driven home how important self-awareness is, especially when it comes to understanding our own biases.
Absolutely. It's not always easy to look at those hidden filters that shape how we see things. But, the more we understand them, the more we can actually make conscious choices
Yeah.
about how we see the world and how we interact with each other.
It's like we're taking back the steering wheel, recognizing that, yeah, bias is part of being human, but it doesn't have to call the shots.
Doesn't have to write the whole story.
Exactly.
And that's such an important message for our listeners, I think.
Yeah.
Even though we might not always realize it, those biases are there, working in the background, influencing our decisions.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Once you see them, you can start to question them, challenge them, and even use them to your advantage.
Like turning a potential weakness into a strength.
Exactly. And on that note, I want to encourage all our listeners out there to really embrace this idea of understanding their own biases.
It's a challenge for sure.
It is. It takes honesty, curiosity, and, being willing to maybe step outside your comfort zone a little bit.
But it's so worth it.
It is. Because the more we know ourselves, the better chance we have of creating a world that's, well, more understanding, more compassionate, more just for everyone.
You couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and often surprising world of bias.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
We hope this episode has, sparked some new ideas and maybe inspire you to think a little differently about the world around you.
And for those of you who are craving more deep dives into all the mysteries of the human experience, stick around.
Oh yeah, we've got some truly mind-bending episodes coming up that will explore everything from the nature of consciousness to the future of artificial intelligence.
So buckle up, deep divers.
The journey continues.